Hi everybody, thanks so much for coming along. As Daniel just mentioned, I'm the engineering manager for JIRA Software. First though, I'm going to show you a big picture, happy picture of the team that's behind JIRA Software at the moment. So this is a small portion of the team, having a bit of time out at the end of last year. So one of the things that I've been lucky enough while I've been here at Atlassian is actually working on quite a few different teams. And a common thing about all those teams is that they use JIRA Software, but they use JIRA Software in many different ways. So, and those teams, they kind of get encouraged to define their own process and evolve it as they need it and as different challenges come up. So this talk, the premise of this talk, in fact, is the result of me talking to 4 very effective team leads within Atlassian and trying to understand some of the things that they do differently, either with the tool or also with the team. So some of these tips that we're going to go through are very JIRA Software specific, and some you can do just with your team even if you're not using JIRA Software, and you won't actually see a direct correlation to the tool, but they're just really good practices that the team are doing. And a few of the assumptions that I made kind of while doing these interviews and deciding what to include is about who you are in this room. So I kind of made 3 big assumptions. First up, that you're all working on or with a software team of sorts. You've probably worked with JIRA Software before, so you understand that boards are essentially backed by a very powerful JIRA query language filter, and that's what displays those cards that are on the board. And you understand that you can even have a board that transcends projects just by tweaking that filter. You can pull in multiple issues from multiple projects. So some of those advanced things you're probably conscious of already. And thirdly, that I've assumed that you're probably doing agile already of some form. So if I use some terms that are foreign to you, they will be most likely agile terms. So things around Scrum, where you've got time-based sprints and you're doing story point estimation maybe, you're using burn-down charts to track velocity, etc. Or Kanban, which is about work flowing between different columns, different statuses, and you're really tracking that work is moving forward. So before we begin, I'm going to give you one of my black belt tips, and this is really a black belt tip of the traditional sense that it's a bit of a ninja mind trick, and it's something that I do with a team, kicking off a largish project, so that could be about 3 to 4 months in size, and it's really trying to surface as many risks within that are going to come up on that project as early as possible and put people in a comfortable place, put everyone in a comfortable place so that they can surface those risks early. We probably heard Dom speak yesterday to the playbook, and this is actually one of our plays. It's called a pre-mortem. So a pre-mortem is exactly like a post-mortem, which happens, post-mortem happens after a project's failed and you want to work out why. With a pre-mortem, if you've not heard, you do that up front and you pretend that the project has just failed, that you're about to start on. And that does a little mind trick. Firstly, that does a little mind trick. There's some psychology in there where people will feel more comfortable raising concerns if the project hasn't actually failed and they're not pointing the finger at anybody because nothing has actually happened, okay? So you will get a lot richer set of risks raised inside that pre-mortem. Go and check it out on the playbook. I highly recommend it to read through and do this with your team. So my actual tip though, it's not about doing pre-mortems, it's about my flavor of pre-mortems. So you have to get the team to imagine that they're in the future and that the project has failed. So people come in to the room, they're in the present, they're in the now, they're off checking mails, there's so much going on, they're often very distracted. I like to pull them into the future by doing a little mindfulness exercise. Now, I probably don't need to sell to this crowd how effective the practice of mindfulness meditation can be to just getting you on track, but it's very, very useful in this setting to just drag the team. So bear with me, we're going to just do 60 seconds as a group right now of just bringing ourselves into the future. That future for you guys is going to be the end of this conference, and we're going to do a little post-mortem at the end of this. So just get yourself comfortable. Just put all of your phones down. Just put your hands down, come in a comfortable position, and just lie. Just sit there in your chair, and you can just feel that chair supporting your body, supporting your weight. Just recognize when your mind is wandering, and bring it back to your breath. And just try and focus on this very moment and try and be very present with us here in this room. Okay, doesn't that feel good? Just to have that, that mind that has now transcended into the future. Now pretend that you're at the end of this conference and that you haven't actually gotten everything you wanted from the conference. So you may not have been bold enough to go and talk to enough people. You may not have gotten those contacts. Just try and make a gentle list in your mind of what's caused that. Think about what you really wanted out of the conference. And imagine that you've gone home and unfortunately you didn't achieve those goals. So start identifying at least 2 things that you're going to do differently when you walk out of this talk, and try and get the most you can out of the summit today. So that's a little example. I hope that you're feeling a little bit more focused and that you're a little bit more with us and you're ready to kind of start the presentation with me. So let's get started. We've got 4 teams to talk about. First one, we're going to look at Esther, who's a team lead on the purchasing team. And they look after all of the billing infrastructure for Atlassian's cloud offering. One challenge that Esther and her team had, they needed was to overcome planning meetings where they felt like that the outcome of their sort of sprint planning meetings, they weren't really achieving what they wanted to achieve. So no one really left the room feeling awesome or that was a worthwhile meeting. So the second tip that we're going to bring up, so all of these orange slides, if you haven't worked out, these will be the key tips that we're talking about, is to separate that estimation session from the planning session. So try not to do too many things at once. So this way the team, it was just the engineers doing the estimation session first, and then planning where they did the sprint commitment came later. So they could have a lot more focus in that meeting and they could actually do deeper dives into technical problems, open up code, etc. They were also a lot less rushed because there were less disciplines in the room. So they could really focus on looking at the estimates for those tasks and less on explaining things to non-technical people, for example. They do this several days before the actual planning session, and that lets them identify some of the blockers that may come up. So throughout the estimation session, there are definitely lots of grooming activities that you need to do to your backlog. And often, teams like Esther's, they do this live in JIRA Software. But sometimes that kind of clicking around on a screen can kind of disrupt the focus of the group. So for these next tips, it's all about how Esther will drive JIRA Software. So there's some pretty technical stuff coming up on a live screen while all of her team are watching on. We all know what that pressure can be like, and it can be fairly intense stuff. So it's something you probably should try and do a few times if you've not done it in a live setting before. Do it on your own a few times. So this is an example of a backlog. There's lots of different things going on. We're just going to have a quick look at how Esther's using epic filtering and also quick filtering just to narrow down the number of issues on the backlog, which can be quite daunting. So epics can mean different things for different people. Esther, though, likes to use them as just colourful labels or categories. Sometimes they're features or units of work, sometimes they're themes, engineering, health, performance, etc. And you can filter all of the tickets by epic just by clicking on that side epic on the side in your backlog there. Now, something that's not so obvious, you can assign an epic just by dragging and dropping that issue straight into that epic panel. And then that issue is related to the epic. So quick filters are another really good way of narrowing down issues in the view, and they're very configurable using the JIRA query language, or JQL. So here are just some of these quick filters that Esther uses: unestimated, not started, or for a specific sub-team, so that she can really focus in on the backlog. So both quick filters and epics, they allow you to filter out the distractions, and you get a smaller, concise list of issues to discuss. So we're going to talk about those issues themselves next. So this is the panel that you're probably very familiar with, but what a lot of people don't realize, you can go even further and actually customize that panel to just show the fields that are relevant to your team. You can also edit the fields right in there, in that panel, without kind of clicking away to the full view issues screen. And it's a lot easier to capture kind of live information as it's coming in from the development team by updating that ticket right there. So Esther's involved in improving her QA process at the moment. So she has chosen to put her own custom fields for testing notes and demo status into the detail view so that it won't get forgotten, for example. Now, we've only looked at what is already on your backlog, but what if a new issue comes up in that session that you realize you want to break out and put something new on the board? So there are a couple of different ways you can do that. The first one, very obvious, is that huge call to action up in the header, which is the big create issue button. It's often non-optimal for working directly with JIRA Software, actually. And it's not the best if you're going to be doing this in a live setting in front of the team. You can use the create issue in the epic button. That's a link down there, and that will just add that issue to the epic and the correct project that you're going with. The one that we use the most, though, is the inline issue create. Now, this is hidden a little bit at the bottom of the backlog. It's a very subtle button there, but it's extremely powerful. It's got a lot of smarts behind it to make sure that when you create an issue on the board, that it stays on the board, and it will add all of the filters that you've applied for the board onto that issue. So it'll pre-populate those fields for you. So for example, if you've got an epic selected, the issue will be added to that epic. If you've got labels kind of filtered out by labels, then those labels get pre-populated as well on the issue. It also understands all of these fields, so components and versions, assignees, sprints, projects, etc. So definitely be using that when you're just creating issues quickly on the backlog. Now, keyboard's pretty common. If you're not using keyboard shortcuts in JIRA, you're probably getting a little bit ripped off. I'll definitely, especially in that team setting when you've got the team looking over your shoulder, you don't want to be that person messing around with a mouse. You've got the rest of the team wondering, what are you doing? You can do that in a single keyboard shortcut. They save lots of time. So the 4 big ones that Esther uses: A, assign to somebody; I, which is quite cool, assign to me. So one button click assigns that issue to myself. S and T, very useful on that backlog when you want to send something to the top of the backlog or send something to the bottom of the backlog, and that's S and B. Rather than scrolling all the way up and trying to work your way through the backlog if it gets quite large. Now there's one shortcut. I think if you take something away from this talk, it's this, if you're not doing it already. It's the mother of all shortcuts, actually. It's called the dot. People know about the dot in JIRA. Definitely use the dot. It will bring up a dialog, and it lets you access all of the standard JIRA issue actions. I mentioned before that while keyboard shortcuts can save a bunch of time, they do get underused. One of the reasons is people don't remember them. So this will let you remember them just by typing ahead and finding out the next action that you want to do. So there's a few strategies that Esther uses to help with her estimation sessions and meetings, and helps her be a lot more efficient with JIRA Software. We're going to rush along now to Andy Dreisen. He's on the JIRA Cloud Mobile team. And he has got pretty aggressive deadlines, actually, building out the mobile experience for JIRA. One thing that he's really keen on and focused on is doing something completely different with how his team does estimation. And he's noticed that it's generally quite a difficult task to do estimation for software teams. I think anyone that's tried it is well aware of that. So he's no longer doing planning poker, which is quite a common thing, but he's tried to evolve that somewhat. And he's now doing something called relative estimation. And he finds this just a lot quicker, and it's a bit less painful than traditional ways of trying to estimate work. So there's 3 parts to how to run a relative estimation session. First one, a little bit of preparation. Then you have the main meeting where you call in all of the team. And the last 5 minutes is where you actually assign estimates or story points to the tickets. So it starts with generally Andy and the PM putting together a rough backlog of where they want to get to the next sprint, and then they print off the cards. So you just saw that happen then. You can do that right within JIRA Software. You can take a backlog that's even filtered and print off the cards, prints them off, cuts them out, takes that into the estimation session. The team, it's quite a different experience. They're not using JIRA Software or a monitor. They're just using these cards to lay them out on the table, and the goal here is to rank them by estimate and complexity. So they read them out as a group, they make sure they all understand them, place them out on the table, then they start just by putting one card out on the table. That's kind of your baseline. Everyone understands that, and then they start ranking the cards from simple to most complex along that table. So you can see here the simple end and the complex end. So we'll go through a quick session that the team did, and they put the second card down. That was actually more or less similar, so you just place it next to the first one. They go around the room. Actually, they're passing that pile of cards around, and each person is involved, so they get to read out the card, make sure everyone understands it. Then they keep going, placing the cards. They build up their backlog, eventually gets ranked. Here, Rutger, the PM, is actually just adding a new story. He's just grabbed a pen and started to create a new story that the team is going to have to fill in for that sprint. And then eventually, they've gone through all the tickets. They can start assigning story points. So the simple end, they agree that they're all the 1s. Then they're the 3s, the 5s, the 8s, the 13s. In this session, though, they kind of think about the previous sprints and they say, well, those 13s, they're not really 13s compared to other sprints. So they calibrate across sprints by checking. And so they just merge them in, and then they've got their 8s, and off they go. Update the story points and make a sprint commitment away in JIRA. And they find this is a lot easier. They enjoy that it's kind of standing around a table using physical cards. And it's definitely good to try things, freshen things up with your team. You know, if you've been doing planning poker for a while, try something different and see how that goes. Certainly worth a while. It does take a little bit of practice to get this right, so don't give up after the first time that you try. We're going to have a look now at someone very special, Michael Toker, and I've just found out he is in a rock band and he's touring Europe at the end of the year. Small little fact. So he's been with JIRA for an extremely long time, and we often go to Michael Toker to get, you know, those questions answered that nobody else on the team can kind of seem to grok. He's now working in the JIRA platform team. He's got quite a large team of developers. Now, like a good team lead, Michael doesn't want those developers focusing on too much meta work or work about the work. He wants them focusing on solving those really hard problems that he's got to solve. So he likes to automate stuff. So he makes sure that his automation on the board between the issue tickets and the source code, for example, or Bamboo, is as automated as can be. So he does this in JIRA by using some automatic issue transitions, and we'll just quickly go through 3 of those. But first we're going to have a look at Tokes' workflow. So this is a tip in and of itself. If you're not doing this already, it's something that we see more and more people do. It's having a very open workflow. So rather than trying to lock things down, you cannot go to in review unless you've been in progress. Don't try and do that. Developers know the status of the tool. Just let them go from to do straight to in review if that's been the case already. So set up your workflow to begin with very loosely and see how that goes. Oftentimes you won't need to change it. We hear from lots of customers that have end users that are quite frustrated actually sometimes with JIRA, and it's probably a lot of JIRA admins who try to lock things down as much as possible, and that frustrates the end users, and they're thinking that it's a problem with JIRA, but it's JIRA's flexibility and how it's been set up that can cause that frustration. So try and keep things open for the team. And it makes a lot of other things easier and possible as well within the tool. So to add the trigger, if you haven't worked it out, you're clicking on that little arrow, that little grey arrow inside of the workflow, and then it's pretty self-explanatory from there how to go and add a trigger off to automate a lot of the issue transitions in your team. So the three that Tokes uses and swears by, finds super useful, are the branch created, the pull request merged, and when a deployment is actually successful, to update that and move it into the final column. So here we're looking at branch created. Now for this to work though, you need to include the issue key in your branch name in your Git repository, more or less, or your SCM. So we'll quickly have a look at branch naming conventions. So that little JSW-3429 in there, that issue key, that is the glue that lets Atlassian tools talk to each other. So you can have Bamboo understanding that with JIRA and with Bitbucket, and they can all talk to each other and link things up via that special issue key. So there's some pretty special pattern matching going on that actually works and does that. So that's one thing that you need to get your team comfortable with. It's using issue keys in commit messages and in branches. If it's quite new and you need to get started with your team, just use the create branch feature inside of JIRA. It's all I do if I'm finally developing, because it just gets it right every single time and there's no way I'm going to mistype it or do anything. So you can create that branch straight from JIRA, straight into Bitbucket, and then you don't need to think too much about it. So you could just enforce that almost. The second trigger that Tokes uses is pull request merged. So when a pull request gets merged, we actually mean that that is ready for customers. I think that's a pretty standard pattern now. So more or less anyone in the company could deploy that version of master out and it should be fine. So we really want people to be comfortable with that. So once the PR is merged to master, we want that issue to be automatically transitioned into waiting for deployment. And the last one is when a deployment actually occurs, we want that to reflect as well. So this is roughly where he's got automation on his board. Another little tip to deal with this and to make it even less painless is have one pull request per issue. So often the status gets very fuzzy when you start to have too many pull requests for an issue. So just try to keep it simple. Start with one pull request per issue. So yeah, definitely give it a go. It doesn't work for every single team. Some teams kind of don't like the automation, they're a bit scared by it, but I'd definitely recommend it first and then see how it works out for your team. Next up, we're going to look at Ed Zhang from JIRA Service Desk. So the JIRA Service team, relatively new team in Atlassian. They've still got a long roadmap ahead of them. And these guys have hit a pretty cracking velocity when it comes to delivering new features and experiences in the product. One thing, though, that they realized was that they weren't hitting their sprint goals. They weren't getting through enough stuff, and they weren't really having a cohesive story at the end of a sprint to show stakeholders, to show product managers, to show anyone else. So that's a problem that Ed and his team really focused on and wanted to solve. And you know, a presentation, a technical presentation especially, is something that you can learn. But the first rule of any good demo or presentation is actually to have something really worthy of a demo. So one of the key ingredients that they identified that they wanted to do actually lay right at the beginning of the sprint, when they said, okay, we're going to just set very concrete sprint goals during our planning session. And they're going to think about the demo, think about what they're going to demo in 2 weeks' time, and use that to kind of drive their sprint goals. So that way they were kind of almost guaranteed a really good demo if they hit their sprint goal. Demos anyway at Atlassian are usually on a Friday. They're lots of fun. There's a bit of a buzz around the place. You try and get a room because lots of people want to do their demos. You often get big stakeholders dropping in, sometimes founders dropping in, want to touch base on how someone's going. So it's really great to have, you know, some awesome stuff to demo on a Friday afternoon. So There's lots of input from lots of different people as to what could go into the sprint goals, but ultimately the team has to decide. So PM tries to influence it and totally should, but it's up to the team eventually to make that commitment and say, yes, this is what we're going to demo, this is what we're going to commit to, this is our sprint goal. But it's also very important for that team that it is measurable. So I'll talk quickly about measurable goals, and this is something that the team are doing. So this is a really good example of a concrete goal, and it is definitely very measurable. So you can either hit that goal 10% improved on August 9, or you're not going to hit it at all. So one thing to make sure that you're setting good, concrete, measurable goals, just build the measurement first. It sounds kind of obvious, but it's crazy how often goals are set and they're either impossible to measure or they're really expensive to measure. So try and think of a goal that you can actually measure pretty quickly, pretty cheaply, and show me that measurement before you even start. So when you're setting then a sprint goal, teams will go out of their way to ensure that they're not just set and forgotten, so they put them in their sprint, so you can actually do that on the board now, and they talk about them during stand-up every single day. The goal appears on the Scrum board, and they just won't get forgotten that way. Also use that sprint goal to kind of limit scope from outsiders of the team, right? So say, look, this is our sprint goal. When they come to you, try and ask you for more stuff, more scope, and say, this is what we're going to ship, this is what we agreed on. We can talk about the next stuff next sprint, but it doesn't align with our sprint goal. Or you might want to take it on because it will totally help you achieve your goal even sooner. So kind of give the team a bit of autonomy that way to make their decisions and help them just move fast, get some stuff done, show progress. So the good news, the Services team across the board are holding some of the best demos in Atlassian, and I was there, I got to witness a few of the sessions. So here's a photo of the recent demo session in Sydney. Really good thing about the demos, there's lots and lots of applause. So people kind of clap and cheer at the end of each demo, so it's always a very good sign. So another big optimization that they did, and a few other teams, is around stand-ups. Quick show of hands, who here is doing stand-ups with your team on a regular basis? Okay, excellent. A lot of the time you see people do a stand-up and it's just people standing around in a circle talking about what they did yesterday, what they're blocked on, what they're going to do today. Ed really flipped that on its head, and he's doing task-centric stand-ups. Some people are probably doing this already, but instead of focusing on the people, you want to focus on the work during a stand-up. You don't want people just using that extremely valuable time of day to talk about, side things or whatever. You want to focus on that work and just really keep the stand-up dedicated to work. So what was done yesterday, what is being worked on today, and most importantly, what work is blocked or won't be ready by the end of the sprint. So here, it's in fact the Confluence team standing around their stand-up board. So that's a big difference. That's a sign that you're doing a task-centric stand-up, is if you're using a board or a stand-up board to actually walk through the columns on that board and talk about where the work is at. It also makes it less obvious if tasks kind of are not in the correct status, and it'll encourage the team to ensure that they get them updated if they're not already. And if somebody is away from a traditional people-centric stand-up, then often that you gloss over what they were working on. Whereas this, it's very obvious that you didn't talk about card X, Y, or Z, right? Because nobody's there to talk for it, so you can spot blockages much sooner, and it's just makes the whole process a lot more easy and obvious. And also, you'll save a bunch of time. So when we talk to teams, they say, cut our stand-up time in half once they started doing this. So that's awesome for engineers because they love getting back to work, and they, not necessarily enjoy giving status updates every single day of the week. So really keep your stand-up focused. So a quick look at some of the boards and how people have configured those boards to make it possible. But to run, so say this was our stand-up board. You start actually at the done column, and you look at the assignee that's on the card. That person talks about that work. Then you go down, and you move from right to left across the board until you've talked about every ticket. And it's the assignee that will pick up that ticket, making sure that you do talk about every single piece of work that's in flight. So remember that a board is pretty cheap to build and configure for your team. So we see teams building boards for different purposes. One of those is for specifically for stand-ups. So here is what the Confluence team, what they've done. They've built a much compactor board so that it can be viewed on a bigger screen and people can see it from further away. It has fewer columns. They've made sure that the statuses are on the cards, and they've got some quick filters that are stand-up specific to help them with that. So here are two of the quick filters that actually Confluence use today, and they can just filter the board based on what issues have actually been updated in the last 24 hours. So they can get a much clearer view. So there's some funky JQL that you can use to just configure the board to have that filter available, and they can filter those things down. So they find these a lot leaner. They find that you have less waffle from non-technical people at the stand-up that sometimes like to justify what they've done the day before. It's not the point of stand-up. Talk about the work, use a task-centric board and task-centric stand-up. So these boards and kind of the stand-ups and the boards that power them, that's yet another example of how some of the teams in Atlassian keep changing their process and tooling just to keep their team humming. So we'll quickly have a small recap over some of the highlights and the best tips that we've just covered. So we talked about separating your estimation session from your planning session. So try and have a more dedicated technical estimate session. We had a quick look at filtering down that backlog using epics and quick filters. If you're not doing that already, definitely go and research how to do that. We talked about the best ways of creating issues, definitely using inline issue create and the way that works, the power that brings with it. We looked at tokes, using automatic workflow transitions to make sure, and triggers to make sure that his team aren't constantly being nagged to update their tickets on the board. Use the dot key in JIRA. It will save you lots of time. Andy Dreisen from JIRA Mobile is doing, changing things up with estimation sessions, doing relative estimation session now to kind of make that a lot less painful and just help the team move a bit faster. Set sprint goals and, show them on your stand-up board, show them on your sprint commitment. And lastly, we had a long look at task-centric stand-ups and flip kind of your stand-ups around so that they're not people-focused, but they're work-focused. So, whoa, thank you. We're going to have time for a few questions, I think, Danielle. Is that right? Yeah. There is a small caveat. If anyone asks me a question, I'm going to ask you a question back.
So, if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and I'll try to run the microphone over.
I hope you're not too nervous. They're easy questions.
I would like to know why there isn't any support in JIRA for doing this planning you showed us on the table before you set up a board and have the sprint ready. We want to do that on distance, and then we need to have this table in JIRA.
Yeah, very good question.
You understand what I mean?
It's something we've not focused on in the product, but it's something we certainly believe that a lot of the partners and ecosystem either have done already. I haven't gone and had a look at, to be honest, but it's very doable. And if we were to implement ourselves, it would almost be an add-on that we would do to kind of add that functionality on top of JIRA. But if there are any partners out there, it could be a great idea to add, because doing it, the team that are using it inside Atlassian, they like the physical cards for now. But I understand if you're across offices, you can't do that.
Okay. So
would you like
it will come in the future then?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. So the counter question. So this is all JQL based. JQL is super powerful, super important. Do you remember which version of JIRA JQL was introduced?
I haven't worked with JIRA for more than 2 years,
okay.
So I suppose it was before that?
It was well before that. Got any takers? Sorry? Fantastic. JIRA 4.0. 4.0 we had JQL.
Hi. In the JIRA we have many projects, and those projects are very much interrelated among themselves. So we have kind of a back-end project that does some modules, and then those modules are used in other implementation projects around. Mm-hmm. What is a question mark for us is when there is a bug or there is an issue that needs to be treated, like in the front-end implementation, how do we manage that transition to the back-end project that is creating that module and then needs to be used in those implementations? Does the bug keeps there and the back-end team works on the bug in that project, or do we move? How do we manage that kind of isolation?
If I understand correctly, you've got different projects for those different teams, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So you could merge it down into one project is an obvious answer and use other ways to separate that work, components or something like that. Mm. You could link the issues. So that's a very common pattern that we use as well internally, and there's some really good linking capabilities. It's very easy to do. And then you can even see the status on the remote issue.
Correct.
As to where it's at. Yeah. They're too obvious.
So linking would be more the path than cloning the issue or moving the issue from one project to the other?
Correct. I usually want to keep that other issue where it was reported, unless it's totally unrelated to that team. But if that team needs it to be successful, then they need to be tracking it as well. So if you move it, you'll lose that reference in the other project, right?
Correct. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, got a big question. Whoa. What, Jake, have we got a screen up? Whoa, we've rebooted. No. Anyway, I'm going to ask you the question. What JQL allows you to find all issues created in the past 2 weeks?
Sorry?
How can I find all issues created in the past 2 weeks using JQL?
That would be created date less than...
Have we got the slides? Has anybody got the slides working?
-2W?
Yes, we have. Perfect. That is a perfect answer. It's created greater than -4 or 2W or 14D, whatever you choose. Good answer. There
okay, I think
it is.
we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Yeah. Okay, I've got 2 more questions. There.
Hi, thank you for JIRA. But I have a small question. We want to use the triggers.
Yep.
Well, we have some very easy workflow. Open in progress, resolved, and verified and closed. Verified, it means we want to trigger it by all of test cases on the Bamboo will be passed and automatically closed. It's possible to create by a triggery?
Yes, from Bamboo.
I mean, I have tried to create by triggering, but I cannot get specific plans from a Bamboo.
Okay, we should talk to support. That should definitely be possible to have that. That's what Tokes is using. So he has a successful deployment, and that will transition the issue.
Okay,
and that comes from Bamboo.
Okay, and next question, small questions again. We've triggering create a branch from the if developer click to let's developing after create some branch with, for example, bug fix and number of issue and summary, but we don't using one branches.
Okay.
And how it's better improve it, implement it to better work.
Let's talk after this. It sounds a bit of a complicated one if you're using more than one branch for an issue, I think.
Okay.
But we missed your question. Can you find, oh, there it is. That's the question, find all issues in an open sprint, that's the answer. Use the function. I'm going to run through, this is the most advanced question, I think we're almost out of time. This is something that is not really documented anywhere, but
okay,
it's quite
it's
funky.
possible.
Have you?
Issue dot development and into PR and S and 0, for example.
Oh my God! Bonus points.
Yeah.
You win the JQL quiz,
Yeah.
Summit 2017.
Thank you.
Well done.
Okay, do we have one more question in the audience?
I have a question. How to get all inactive issues? For example, my employee exited from our company. We want to assign to his manager all of the issue, how to get up. You don't have any adaptive script runner. You don't have a script runner. You need to create.
Tell me.
I just wrote the own the GQL query by using the getting the from by Felix and getting all of users, and will be owner and get and inactive users, and then you can order by and for example to assign to key scheme.
Very good. Awesome.
That's all.
Nice. All right. Thank you very much for coming along. Definitely time for more questions, either out the front or out the back after this. Thank you.